Before Disneyland opened its gates in Anaheim in 1955 and changed the course of American culture forever, Walt Disney had another idea, smaller, more personal, and far less known. It wasn't filled with roller coasters or massive parades, and it didn't involve sprawling crowds or billion-dollar ticket sales. This was a quieter dream, one that existed before the world even knew what a theme park really was. Walt didn't call it Disneyland, he called it Mickey Mouse Park, and the plan was to place it right in the heart of Burbank, California. It was supposed to be the beginning of something magical, but that magic never got the green light. The politics, the land, and the city itself stood in the way, and what could have been the first ever Disneyland quietly disappeared before a single shovel touched the ground. In the late 1940s, Walt Disney was a restless man. He had conquered the world of animation, taken cartoons from a novelty to a respected art form, and built characters that were more famous than most Hollywood stars. But making movies wasn't enough anymore. He wanted something tangible, something real, a place where families could physically step into the world of Disney. He wasn't aiming for anything massive at the time. He wasn't thinking about building a global empire or creating one of the top tourist destinations in the world. No, back then, Walt's idea was just a humble 8-acre park across from his animation studios in Burbank. That was it. That little piece of land was going to be the start of everything. The location was a narrow strip off Riverside Drive, right along the edge of the Los Angeles River. It wasn't a glamorous area. There were no palm-lined streets or elegant boulevards, just warehouses, factories, and train tracks. But for Walt, that was perfect. It was close to the studio, which meant he could visit often, oversee the project personally, and keep costs down. His vision was modest: a small lake where guests could paddle boats, a scaled-down Main Street USA lined with nostalgic shops, a train that wrapped around the whole park, and maybe a few exhibits inspired by American history and Disney films. It wasn't about thrills. It was about charm, about walking through a place that felt like one of his movies come to life. In 1952, he took things a step further and brought in the Stanford Research Institute to conduct a full feasibility study on the Burbank site. The results came back, and they weren't exactly what Walt wanted to hear. The study concluded that the location was just too small. The traffic patterns around the area were already congested, and the infrastructure couldn't support the influx of visitors that even a modest park would bring. But the real blow came from the city of Burbank itself. Local officials weren't impressed with Walt's dream. They didn't want a carnival popping up in the middle of their city. They were afraid of the noise, the traffic, and the crowds. They worried it would attract the wrong kind of attention. And they said no, flat out, firmly, and publicly. That rejection hit Walt hard, but it also flipped a switch. Instead of backing down, he doubled down. If Burbank didn't want his park, then fine. He would go somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere where he could build not just a charming getaway, but a kingdom. That's when he started looking south toward Orange County, where the land was cheaper and the city governments were a little more flexible. What started as an 8-acre park turned into a 160-acre mega project in Anaheim, and the rest is history. But the original idea, the little park by the river, never really left his heart. There's a treasure trove of old documents that still exist, tucked away in the Disney archives: sketches, blueprints, memos. These pieces of paper tell the story of a park that almost was. A boat ride would have meandered through a man-made stream. A miniature train, much like the one Walt built in his own backyard, would have circled the grounds. There would have been a museum of American history and a building filled with dioramas and handcrafted miniatures, one of Walt's lesser-known personal obsessions. Another area would have recreated scenes from Disney films with full-size sets and walk-through exhibits. The whole place would have felt like stepping into a living movie. And here's the part that most people don't know. This original Mickey Mouse Park wasn't just about fun. It was going to be educational. Walt believed in combining entertainment with learning. He wanted kids to walk away not just with souvenirs, but with a sense of wonder about American innovation, history, and even agriculture. There was going to be a small working farm, demonstrations of old-fashioned printing presses, and mechanical exhibits that explained how everyday things worked. The layout was cozy, something you could explore in just a few hours. You didn't need a map. You didn't need a guide. It was simple, thoughtful, and full of tiny details that made it feel human-sized. The kind of place you'd return to over and over again, not because it was huge, but because it felt like home. But as the 1950s rolled in, things changed. Fast. Television exploded in popularity, and Walt Disney became a household name not just for movies but for his new weekly TV show. With more eyeballs and more money coming in, the scale of his dreams expanded too. The advisors around him, especially his brother Roy, were pushing hard for a bigger plan, something that could bring in more visitors, make more money, and grow into something sustainable. Quietly, the Burbank idea faded into the background. The city probably breathed a sigh of relief. They wouldn't have to deal with the parking nightmares or the tourism boom, and Walt quietly pivoted his energy to Anaheim, where he could build something no one had ever seen before. Still, echoes of that first failed dream are baked into the Disneyland we know today. The Jungle Cruise? It started as the boat ride in Mickey Mouse Park, the train that loops around the perimeter of the park, straight from the original sketch. Main Street, USA? Lifted almost word for word from the Burbank plans. It's almost as if Walt took the little park and just stretched it out across 100 more acres, turning a neighborhood attraction into a cultural monument. He didn't abandon the idea. He just scaled it until the world had no choice but to notice. And even after Disneyland opened, Walt couldn't let go of the small stuff. He kept building tiny models in his spare time, intricate little towns, detailed figurines, working miniature trains. Some of those were actually part of his original vision for the Mickey Mouse Park. He never stopped imagining what that smaller, quieter version of Disneyland might have looked like. In a strange way, it might have been closer to his heart than the massive enterprise Disneyland eventually became. If you drive through Burbank today, the original site of Mickey Mouse Park doesn't look like much. Just another industrial stretch of the San Fernando Valley. Warehouses, chain-link fences, faded signage. But if you dig into old city records, the footprint is still there. The river Walt wanted to shape into a scenic boat ride still winds through the area. The parcels of land he once eyed for exhibits and walkways are still marked on outdated zoning maps. Somewhere in a filing cabinet in Burbank City Hall is a rejection letter, a few dry paragraphs that shut down one man's dream and unknowingly rerouted the entire course of American pop culture. Because if Burbank had said yes, if they had just approved that modest little 8-acre plan, there might never have been an Anaheim Disneyland, no Cinderella's castle, no Magic Kingdoms in Tokyo, Paris, or Shanghai. The entire Disney empire might have looked wildly different, or maybe never existed in its current form at all. That one no set off a chain reaction that would ripple through history. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. Walt Disney built his legacy around fantasy, princesses, talking animals, fairy tales, but it was rejection that made him real. It was a bureaucratic slap in the face, a dry letter from a zoning board that pushed him to go bigger. That kind of irony doesn't show up in movies, it shows up in life, and in this case, it reshaped entertainment forever.